Let's see if I can get this going here. Hello, children. I had an idea. Hopefully, this might work a little better. I'm going to recap today's video real quick. Get started off. Yesterday, we're talking about the Federalists Era. If you don't remember, the Federalists favor a strong central government. They think the strong central government should be over the 50 state governments. Keep that in mind. Yesterday, we talked about George Washington. He becomes president. He rises that fame from the French and Indian War, American Revolution, to the presidency. He would help establish the cabinet. The first members that we talked about was the Department of War. The Secretary of War would be Henry Knox. He has expert in military matters. Secretary of State Thomas Jefferson. Remember, his job is to deal with other nations, deal with foreign relations, trade regulations, treaties, things of that sort. The Attorney General Edmund Randolph. Pretty much, he's the people's lawyer. He's there to make sure when all these decisions are made, that they are made with the citizens in mind. And most importantly, the person we talked about a lot yesterday was Alexander Hamilton. The Department of Treasury got started up, and he was named Secretary of Treasury. He's pretty much in charge of the nation's money. The reason why the president has a cabinet, the example I like to use is Donald Trump. He is a businessman. He probably knows quite a bit about business, more than most folks. But when it comes to things like education, the military, medicine, things of that sort, he's got to rely on experts. And those experts advise him to make wise decisions. Same thing with George Washington. That's why he appointed these individuals to the various departments as secretaries. Also, we talked about the Judiciary Act of 1789. That is notable because it pretty much gives the Supreme Court authorization to analyze and view state constitutions and their laws, see if everything's follows the Constitution and it's legal and fair. If it doesn't, they have the right to go in there and overturn that. This is an example of the federal government asserting its dominance over the state governments. Also, the Bill of Rights is passed under George Washington's administration. Once again, the Bill of Rights is the first 10 amendments that you can find in the Constitution. Remember, there's three parts of the Constitution: the preamble, the articles, and the amendments. Once again, the first 10 amendments are known as the Bill of Rights. 12 were proposed, 10 actually got passed. Mr. Alexander Hamilton, he was set up the National Bank. Reason why we set up the National Bank, so the government has an emergency fund they can use real quick in case of national disasters like wildfires, tornadoes, things of that sort. Military, in case we have to go to war, because remember, wars cost money. It's a lot quicker than relying on taxes. Now, a lot of folks proposed or disliked this because they didn't think the Constitution gave the government the right to create such an entity. George Washington disagreed, and we followed his precedent since. Basically, it's implied that the government can do it. It's kind of like the example I like to use. It's not a good analogy, but it's best to come up with. Is when you get your driver's license, it's kind of understood you're going to drive on the right side of the road. You're not going to speed. You're not going to do donuts out in Main Street or something crazy. It's kind of understood that you're going to do this. Same thing with the government. It's kind of understood that they would work on behalf to benefit the public, and it's a lot easier to pretty much take money out of a bank account than it is to have to collect taxes, for instance. Yesterday, I think Mr. Witzel, he brought that up. Taking taxes, it takes a while. But as with a national bank, you have a savings account, you pretty much can pay it off right away. We also talked about the tariffs from yesterday. Once again, pretty much British goods are a little bit cheaper or better quality than Americans. It costs the same. So Americans typically favor to buy British goods. Alexander Hamilton put a tariff. That's pretty much a tax on foreign goods. Basically, this would drive the price up for British goods, making everybody buy American products. Now, the North loved this because the North's industry is based on or the North's economy is based on industry, meaning they have factories, textile mills, things of that sort. Think of city work. While on the other hand, the South didn't like that because they didn't have much industry because their economy is based on agriculture, backed by slave labor. So they don't have this industry. So they're having to pay more for Northern products. This makes them upset. So to keep the Southerners content, they would move the capital pretty much from the New England down to Washington, D.C., and that's capital with an O. Keep that in mind. Pretty much closer you are to the capital, the more money you typically benefit from it, and you can typically influence politics going on in the capital a lot easier. So this would keep the South content by moving the capital to Washington, D.C. In today's lesson, we talked about early challenges with George Washington. First, we talked about the Whiskey Rebellion. It's about the same as Bacon's Rebellion, about pretty much the same group of people. It's in western Pennsylvania. What was going on is that, once again, America's needing to pay off this war debt. American Revolution, remember, wars cost money. So they decided to tax whiskey. Now, whiskey back in the day is not like how it is today. I mean, everybody drank it, from babies to grandparents. It's part of life. It was used for multiple things, even as currency. The first politicians of Tennessee, they was typically paid with moonshine and deer skins. That was their payment for first a little bit. But I digress. But whiskey was a big part of people's lives, and the government decided to tax this. A lot of these Pennsylvania farmers revolted. It was similar to Bacon's Rebellion. They'd find these judges, as you can see here, they found these judges, these tax collectors, so on and so forth, and they would harass them, pretty much terrorize them. Right here, you can see a picture of them tar and feathering. George Washington gets word of this. Now, the difference between Bacon's Rebellion and the Whiskey Rebellion is George Washington actually used the military to put a stop to this. He doesn't have to rely on the militia. This is, once again, highlighting the fact how the Constitution is favoring the federal government. Remember, big government over the 50 state governments. What else we talked about? We talked about the Northwest Territories. Basically, after the American Revolution, the Treaty of Paris, the British were supposed to lead the Ohio River Valley. They sort of did, but they kind of set up along with in the Northwest Territory. Very highly sought after land. The French are here too, trapping, yada, yada, yada. The English still have a sour taste from the American Revolution, so they're supplying these Indians with weapons and ammo and stuff. Because the Indians still think most of them feel that the Proclamation of 1763 should still be followed, meaning nobody should be living past west of the Appalachians. All the pretty much European folk need to be east of the Appalachian. That's going to be a problem, especially here in Pennsylvania, Kentucky, Tennessee, areas like that. So let's start harassing them, yada, yada, yada. Washington gets word of this, and he'll send St. Clair to deal with the Indians. In an upset, I think there's the Miami tribe led by a chief named Little Turtle. He would end up defeating the Americans here at St. Clair in Indiana. A couple years later, Washington's had enough. He pretty much sends a good part of the military there, and they would defeat the Indian resistant and British resistant here at Fallen Timbers. It's pretty much in Ohio. As a result of that, we had the Treaty of Greenville, 1795. Basically, the Indians are signing over Ohio to us. Whether or not it's a good one or not, it's debatable. It's kind of like putting a gun to somebody's head and making them sign a piece of paper. Essentially what happened here, but basically the Treaty of Greenville, the Indians signed over Ohio to the Americans. Also, we talked about the French Revolution. Now, a lot of folks in America supported the French Revolution, got rid of the king. We got rid of our king. But the difference with this was it was very bloody. Here, this is a scene of them storming the Bastille. Right here, you see them executing King Louis the 14th. Very brutal. And this would also bring rise to Napoleon. Napoleon be one of the probably most military-sounded men of the 19th century. Once again, this is King Louis right before he's executed by the guillotine. If you don't know what a guillotine is, it's pretty much a big blade that decapitates you. Very brutal. So this shocked a lot of Americans. They didn't know if they want to support France. Yeah, France is pretty much responsible for the Americans winning their independence from Britain in the American Revolution, but they don't know if they can agree with all this brutality that's going on. And keep in mind, all of these Americans are still English in descent. Now, the problem we have with England is they're still supporting these Indians. They're terrorizing us. But a big thing they are doing is the impressment of American sailors. Back then, I mean, it's only been maybe a generation, if that, removed from independence. And a lot of these folks, they still are English in descent. They sound English, yada, yada, yada. Long story short, Britain wanted to add manpower to their Navy, so they'd capture these Americans. Like, oh, you used to be in the Navy, you deserve to get back on the boat. It's kind of hard to prove that you wasn't English or American at the time, because remember, people don't have like driver's license or photo IDs on them, tells them where they're at. So what they would end up doing is the British would capture these American boats, and all the American men that were on them, they was forced onto the British boats and forced to work for the British Navy. This would make some folks mad. So you got half the people wanting to support France in their revolution and half wanting to support Britain in this war. George Washington, however, decided to remain neutral, meaning he don't want to get into it. He warned about having permanent alliances. Now, up to this point, usually when you have an alliance, they're supposed to last for a lifetime. This started with like the Roman Empire, and you followed it up to Charlemagne and the Franks when he took over Europe. Basically, tradition was you make an alliance, it's supposed to last forever. George Washington's like, we don't want to do that. We're going to stay out of this. It's not our business, yada, yada, yada. We'll stay out of this. Also with Spain, they saw where they took Ohio, pretty much kicked Britain out, yada, 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 with the Treaty of Greenville. So Spain, to kind of keep Americans smooth over in case they start having ideas about kicking them out altogether, they decided to give up their land for pretty much modern-day Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, and they allowed the Americans access on the Mississippi River and New Orleans. New Orleans is very important. It's a big harbor. It's a big trading hub. It's pretty much direct access to the Latin American countries. Down in the Latin American countries, you start getting things like rice, indigo, rum, a bunch of cash crops. It's a money-making area. So this would keep Americans sort of liking Spain for a while. But keep in mind, Spain still has control of Florida, pretty much the southern coast for the most part, all the way up to California. That's the land that they claim. But we'll be talking about that in a moment. And lastly, we talked about George Washington's farewell. Now, he won both elections. Everybody loved him. He didn't have competition. He stepped down after 2 terms. Now, this precedent has been followed by every president. There is an exception. Do some research. Tell me who you think it is and why that exception was made for this certain president to serve more than 2 terms. But basically, it's very emotional. As you can see here, here's a scene depicting like all the generals, all the advisors, the secretaries, you name it. These all got up, shook his hand, thanked him, hugged him. He was a beloved figure. Before he left, he warned about the dangers of political parties. Now, political parties you might recognize today would be the Republicans and Democrats. Well, back then, some political parties were forming. The first 2 political parties that come to fruition would be the Federalist Party, being folks that favor a strong central government over the 50 state governments. Then you have another group called the Democratic Republicans, and they kind of favor more state rights over federal government. But we'll talk about that tomorrow. But example of it, pretty much Washington says you pretty much lose your identity in the group, and the group's what people fight for instead of actual values. A good way to see this was with the nomination of Amy Barrett. She's being President Trump nominated her to be one of the next Supreme Court justices. So remember, this is also the checks and balances. Remember, we talked about checks and balances. So the president nominated this woman to be a judge. Now Congress has to decide whether she be good or not. Yesterday, the Senate voted on her. She got approved by the Senate 52-48. Now, with those numbers, all 52 of those folks are Republicans, and all 48 that said no were Democrats. Now, you can't tell me, I find this hard to believe, that there was not one Republican that wanted to vote against her. You can't tell me there's not at least one that had a reason not to. And you can't tell me that there was not a Democrat that did want to vote for her. This is what George Washington was meaning. When you get with a party, you kind of have to vote with the party instead of what you think is right. Now, it could be that all 52 Republicans did love her, but I'm sure there's one out there that doesn't. And with Democrats, I'm sure there's one out there that did love her, but they had to remain loyal to the party. If they don't, they'll kind of look like as an outsider, and they'll lose influence, and yada, yada, yada. But I digress. But I was wanting to try this video out, see if it works this way. See if I can get my notes behind me now. Adjust my camera here. Here's the notes from today, just to recap. The Whiskey Rebellion, very similar to Bacon's Rebellion, but the exception this time is Washington was able to use the military instead of relying on militias. This is showing how effective the new Constitution is and how effective the federal government is. Challenges in the West, talked about fighting with the Indians in Northwest Territory, ended up defeating the Indians, some of them, in a place called Falling Timbers. they was forced to sign a treaty called the Treaty of Greenville. The Treaty of Greenville. Basically, America gets Ohio from it. Then problems with Europe. We have the French Revolution. It's so bloody, some Americans don't know if they want to support the revolution or not. Then with Britain, they're capturing American sailors and forcing them into the Navy because, once again, it's kind of hard to prove that you was an American or English. Everybody sounded the same back then. The accents hasn't really diverged yet, so that's kind of hard to tell an American from an English person for a while. George Washington decides to remain neutral. Having permanent alliance is a silly in his idea. Yada, yada. In Spain, we get pretty much rights to the Mississippi River and New Orleans with the Picnics Treaty. Jay's Treaty, something. It's meh. We're supposed to talk about it quite a bit, but I find it. And George Washington's farewell. He set the president for president serving 2 terms, but he also warned against political parties. He thinks political parties might be a bad thing for America. I was wanting to try a video out like this, see if this might be a little better. But till next time, this has been History by Phillips. I'm Mr. Phillips. See y'all next time.